Hi, I'm indie fantasy author Melina Kucera, and I just wanted to stop by and give you an update. It's been a roller coaster of a year for me, so give you a quick life update, give you the book update, and an update about the podcasts and videos for this channel as well. So let me do the podcast video update because I'm a little bit excited about that. 2 authors reached out to me recently and their book sounded really neat. So I'm going to be talking to Zach Chopin, and I hope that's how you pronounce his name. I haven't talked to him yet, so I haven't gotten the official pronunciation. I'm just guessing. And we're going to talk about the Mid-Wizard of Cosconia, which again, I hope I'm pronouncing correctly. And it's a land where maternal magic once protected every mother and child, and that's waning. And there's trying to figure out what's going on. So that's kind of neat. And the other person we're going to be talking to is Richie Billing, and we're going to be talking about his book, Together We Rise. And Together We Rise is a political character-driven grimdark fantasy book. It's set in a world with some urban fantasy elements, and it's a world of revolution, corruption, and hope. So it sounded really neat. He created a soundtrack for his book, which I thought was kind of cool. So that episode I've already recorded, and it's publishing as I am talking about this. Hopefully it will have finished publishing by the time I finish giving you my updates. So that one you can go watch right now. I don't know if this episode will publish before I talked to Zach about the Mid-Wizard of Cosconia, so look for that. So that's the podcast video update, and I'm going to continue doing them as people reach out. If it's something that interests me, then I'm going to do it. I'm interested in basically anything fantasy, so if somebody reaches out about a fantasy book, I can't see myself saying no. I love books. I'm constantly reading. I'm currently reading Saga, which it's a graphic novel series that I'm reading in paper and that my friend got me into. Audiobooks, I'm always listening. So I love books. So yeah, so if you're listening and you're an indie author, or you've written something and you want to come on and talk about it, reach out to me, and let's do that. I like talking about books. So that out of the way. So then the life update, it's been a rough year. My father passed away in September. The company that I work for full-time was bought out, and I was told that I was going to be let go early in 2026. But plot twist, they actually extended an offer to me last week. So I'm reviewing it, but I am going to accept it, and I'm just looking at everything to make sure I understand what I'm agreeing to make sure that I fulfill my obligations. I'm very responsible like that. I like to make sure that I'm crossing all the T's and dotting all the I's. So that's great, because that was a huge worry. There was a weight just sitting on me, and that's lifted. There's a lot of details to still work out. I still don't know exactly what I have a title, and I'm not sure exactly what the responsibilities are, but it's exciting. I'm excited that I'll still get to work with some of the people that I've been working with for 17 years. So that's a big relief, and I'm grateful for the opportunity. That's the life update. And now the book update. I don't remember if I mentioned this in the previous update because that was 3 months ago. So we'll just do a quick rewind. So in the beginning of 2025, I finished writing the book Chaos Rises, and I launched that in a Kickstarter in May. And at the time I was planning the Kickstarter, I had fully intended to write the rest of the series and spend this year writing the Riders of the Apocalypse series. But after I found out that I was going to be let go, I just didn't feel like writing about Riders of the Apocalypse. That just felt too heavy, too much. And I wanted to finish out the books that I've written about the newsletter adventures. My newsletters existed since 2017, and there have been a lot of stories, and a lot of them take place in and around where I work. And I didn't think I'd be able to revisit that time once I had left the company. Once they had let me go, that door would be closed, and I wasn't sure that I could re-enter that part of my life and be able to write those stories. So I chose to move those forward because I know that they're fan favorites, and I know that there's a lot of you out there who've been waiting for the final book in the original newsletter trilogy, which is the Cursebreaker's Companion series, which I published the first 2 books of that in 2020. That was Dragon Spells. In 2021, that was Rogue Spells. And you've been waiting for Storm Spells since then, and I'm really sorry it took that long. But if you've read Storm Spells, you know what insanity they got into, and I had no idea how we were going to resolve any of this. I fully admit this. I had no idea how to resolve that. So Rand had the great idea, which he actually came up with it in 2024 before I had any idea that my dad was going to pass away or that the company I work for was going to be bought out or that I would be losing my job. And he said, well, why don't we go back and take the earliest newsletter adventures and turn them into books? And that might help you figure out what happens in Storm Spells. Because at the end of Rogue Spells, they go back to 2018 to one of the first stories in the newsletter that was actually a novel-length story. I don't understand why we didn't start with that. That's not where the characters wanted to start. So the actual story that's in Dragon Spells and Rogue Spells actually happened in the newsletter in 2020. I don't know why they wanted to go back to 2018. So I needed to figure that out because that didn't make any sense to me. It still doesn't, but we'll get to that. So I started back in 2024 writing what would become the first book in the Tales of the Cursebreaker in New York series, which is that book was called Catch the Scribe. And when my father passed away, I put it aside for a while, and I decided in the beginning of 2025 to finish it. So I did, and then I wrote the sequel, Book Battles, and then I wrote the sequel to that, Rogue Characters, and I finished Rogue Characters. Actually, I finished Rogue Characters like at the beginning of August, but I wasn't sure I had finished it, and I reread it a bunch of times. I started writing Storm Spells, which is the third book in the Cursebreaker's Companion series, which chronologically takes place right after 5 months after Rogue Characters ended, but we're going to leave that aside because these newsletter stories are supposed to be fun and wild and crazy and drive me nuts and enchain you. It'd be highly entertaining for you, but not so much fun for me to write sometimes. So eventually I realized mainly Rand wanted a side quest, and I was trying to figure out how we put this in or how we transition from what was going on in the Tales of the Cursebreaker New York series to what's happening in the Cursebreaker Companion series, skipping over the story in between them, which is that Storm story, because they like to drive me crazy. They like to time travel, and I don't like time travel. So anyways, that's a me issue, there's nothing wrong with time travel stories. There are some great ones out there. I just am not a big fan of that. Other than Back to the Future, I did like that. But I've gotten off topic. So yeah, I didn't realize that I had pretty much finished Rogue Characters. I did go back and write a couple extra chapters at the end that I thought really tied things together. And when you read it, you'll see what I mean and why Rand couldn't get to side quests, why another character had to get the side quest to connect them. He's still upset about that. But yeah, he can't always get all the page times. Sometimes other characters have to get some too for the plot to work. Anyways, so that's done, and I'm just doing the edits for Rogue Characters, and I'm writing Storm Spells. And then I made a few days ago, I was at my mom's house and we watched K-pop Demon Hunters. That movie puts you into like a flow state. And like 2 days after it, all I could do was outline these two new stories that came to mind. They have nothing to do with the K-pop Demon Hunters movie, sadly. My brain connected all the dots between some older stories that I had written and abandoned like 10, 12 years ago and presented me with a pretty good plot and way of like completing those stories. So I've been outlining that. I don't know when you'll get to read any of that. I'm not sure when exactly I'm going to write those because I had decided after I finished Storm Spells that I was going to write Mage Hunter and Demon Hunter, which is the two sequels to the Relic Hunter, which I wrote and published Relic Hunter, I think in 2018 or 2019. So those were supposed to be next. They're supposed to be next. I'm supposed to do that next. That is supposed to be what is next on there. I'm not supposed to write some really fun story that came to me after watching K-pop Demon Hunters. We'll have to check in a couple of months and I'll have to let you know which story I actually ended up writing. Also, after those two, I plan to write the rest of the Riders of the Apocalypse series, which is Chaos Reigns and Chaos in Chains, and then Cursebreaker Jousts. That is definitely happening because I wrote the original draft of Cursebreaker Jousts in 2012. I would really like that story to be out in the wild for people to read. I've been trying to get them to this darn joust since Cursebreaker Enchanted. That's why there's so many mentions in there. I kept trying to get the characters to do this story, and they just kept going every which way except toward this story. I think they were just doing it to torture me, honestly. I don't think it has anything to do with the story itself. It's a good, fun story. I think they were just trying to torture me. That's my conclusion. So that's what's going on, and I'm going to try and check in more often. So to recap, I have finished 3 books that you have not read. If you're not on my Patreon, if you're not a paid member of Substack, then you have not read these books, and you should definitely do that soon. And those 3 books are the Tales of the Cursebreaker in New York series. My hope is that I can launch the Kickstarter in November, and it will have the Tales of the Cursebreaker in New York series, and the final book in the Curse Breakers Companion series. So that's the goal. If Ren doesn't go on too many side quests, we might actually achieve it. So I'll have to check back in with you in a month or two and let you know how that's going. But that's it. That's my update. So yeah, I'm hoping good things are coming for you and for me, and that things are going to get better. And I hope that you read some really good books. I have a whole lot of them if you're looking for good fantasy books. So thank you so much for coming to my very random, all over the place chat. This is actually the second time that I have recorded this, and I was trying to be a little less all over the place, but alas, this is what I really like in real life. So you're getting a dose of what the real Melinda is like. Sign up for the newsletter so that Brand can tell you all about what I'm writing or not writing, or what he wishes I'm writing. He seems to bounce back and forth between that, and we'll talk soon. Thank you so much. Bye.